Get started because I see that there are a lot of people on right now, and I want Sabrina to have the time to speak and facilitate tonight's program. I want to welcome everyone to our 2021 kickoff of our Arts and Humanities speaker series, where students select and invite influential community members and role models who have inspired them, so that they can then share their experiences and stories of inspiration with a larger audience. A little bit about Sabrina. Before she provides an official introduction for our guests, I want to tell you a little bit about how I met Sabrina. As a sophomore, she entered our school's inspirational speech contest. Her recitation of Hurricane had the audience in absolute awe. She then used her winning performance to promote cultural awareness and performed at various events. Last year, she co-wrote, directed, and performed in a holiday play. The production raised more than $1,000 for a local homeless shelter. This past summer, she created a documentary that explored the impact of racism and prejudice within our own town and shared her work through social media. I've watched Sabrina use her talents, strengths, and determination to raise awareness about relevant issues and help others within her community. She serves as our Interact Club president and continues to demonstrate selflessness on a daily basis. The list goes on. But if I continue to go through all of Sabrina's accomplishments while at Chariho High School, and those are only in the arts and humanities, she would not have time to get to tonight's speakers. Again, I want to thank everyone who has joined us tonight. I especially want to thank our speakers for giving your time to the Chariho community tonight. So thank you so much for being with us. Take it away, Sabrina.
Well, first off, thanks for that awesome introduction. I'm super excited to have you all here today. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I'm really excited to introduce our first guest speaker. It is Tiara Mac. So she's going to share a little bit about herself, her job, her influence in the community, and then I'm going to open the floor up for everyone to ask questions, make comments. I'm just going to ask that everyone keeps themselves muted as our guest speakers are giving their little performance, as I like to call it, because as Ms. Hall mentioned, I am into the arts. So yeah, if you could just keep yourselves muted while the other people are speaking, that would be great, but feel free to have your cameras off or on, whichever you prefer. It's pretty not formal. It's just really getting to know the people in our community that are making a difference and honoring the Black culture that we so love. So Tiara Mac, if you would like to please unmute yourself and tell us a little about yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tiara Mac, and I am a organizer and educator and Rhode Island's first elected Black LGBTQ senator in the state. I am 27 years old. I was 25 when I first announced I won, and 27 now. And that started the journey through activism as a young person who grew up in the Christian South. I grew up just north of Atlanta and lived in Columbia as well. And growing up, I did not receive comprehensive sexual health education. Sixth grade, I abstinence pledge. That was kind of the end of all conversation about my body and my health. And it wasn't until I was a freshman at Brown University orientation program where I realized how my education was from the others who were at the same institution as me. During that experience, not only was I one of the few Black students who was on campus, I was one of the few low-income students who was on campus. And then I also like an outsider because I didn't have the tools or the language to talk about my body and my autonomy. And so after first semester, I decided to start teaching sex ed in Rhode Island, starting at the Met High School, which is here in Providence. And that really showed me how the world from what I grew up, I was taught, was able to empower young people who were 5 years younger than me, an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, teaching folks how to engage in their body, but also unlock conversations about the political landscape in which they live. And after my year of teaching said in Providence schools, I interned with Planned Parenthood and worked during the 2015 legislative session in Rhode Island to help pro-choice candidates in the state. And that's when I realized how similar Rhode Island is to my home state of Georgia and South Carolina. A lot of folks who were disconnected from the issues and who were disconnected from the community use their belief to how they create policy and narratives in the state house. And I was so used to being in this new state, which I was my home, that I was kind of shocked to see that there was a much more conservative and, quite frankly, not as democratic and left blue that I was experiencing. So after my internship working with Planned Parenthood, I got involved in numerous other organizations still as an undergrad, and really was exploring what it meant to be a member of the community and really challenge some of the ideas that I grew up with while working with young people. After graduating from Brown University, I started teaching high school math in New Bedford, Massachusetts. I was a math teacher there. And that's when I realized that even my own education as someone who was formerly low income, who was a Black student, I was fortunate enough to have plenty of teachers and community members who looked like me, who shared my background. And for many of my students who were in the 10th grade at the time, I was their first Black math teacher, and oftentimes their first Black teacher they've ever had. And so not knowing that they're not having representation in the communities and folks who looked like me but had radically different experiences, being able to go from a low income community where my mom worked a minimum wage job, one of 5 children, and was able to go to one of the top universities in our nation. That wasn't the same story that was possible for students who looked like me and had my same background, but lived in a completely different part of the country in Massachusetts, which was heralded as more access for people. And so after teaching for a little while, I became a youth organizer, and now I work as a youth organizing specialist at Planned Parenthood, where I empower young people to engage in local and national issues and teach them how to organize in their communities and see the world through a more just lens, a more racially just lens, and a more equitable lens. And it combines how I was able to unlock my own voice, my own activism through learning about my body and my autonomy, but also working with young people in the ways of teaching math and teaching inclusion through being a person who represents some of the same backgrounds and same stories that the people in my community now share. And in 2016, in 2018, I worked on the Rhode Island campaign to codify Roe v. Wade in Rhode Island state law, which was a landmark decision in Rhode Island to finally codify abortion access no matter what happens federally in the United States. This bill had been up for many, many years, and 2018 was the first year that it got a lot of traction. And it was through that experience that I realized that not only was I one of the only people who looked like me in the state house, but there were very few people who knew what it was like to be not only a Black woman, but a young Black queer person who was navigating being low income, navigating the medical health care system, and navigating a political system that was not meant to represent people who look like me. And it was during that experience that I realized that my eventual opponent was someone who stood on a very different side of these issues. He used his religion, my religion, to polarize people around a topic and around access to their own bodies and their own narratives. And it was through that experience that I realized that we need to have more people in positions of power and in positions of change that had the stories and had the narratives more akin to the people who were in their communities. And a lot of folks challenged it. I was a young person who ran for office, and they said, well, why don't you run for city council first? Or why don't you run for a state rep seat first? But as someone who knew that change comes when we have folks who are in positions of power, and we have change when people challenge the systems that are in place. And I knew that I wanted to challenge the system that said that someone who had been in a seat for 30 years was more qualified to speak about the issues that directly impacted someone like me and people like me and stories like mine, people who worked paycheck to paycheck, people who didn't have access to quality healthcare, and people who didn't have access to walking into a big scary white building and talking to people who were called honorable senator or representative in their communities. And so that's what inspired me to run. And I announced a couple months before the pandemic, and then my campaign took full swing during the global pandemic, and I knocked hundreds of thousands of doors, sent hundreds of emails, raised hundreds of dollars, and ran on an unapologetic and bold platform that the status quo does not work. Some people may call me a radical or a progressive. I call myself a formerly low income person who's experienced the injustice in this world and know what it's going to take in order to right some of the historic and systemic wrongs that have impacted people in our communities for way too long. So that's a little bit about me and how I got to where I am. And I'm happy to answer any and all questions.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about yourself. Let's give her a round of applause, everyone. So I have to say, I think it's great how young you are, because I myself and so many other people in this meeting are young people that honestly just want to be influential in their community, in their state, in things that hold power. And, you know, a lot of myself and a lot of other students would agree that it doesn't always take the older people, like you said, that have been in a seat for 30 years to make change. Someone that is young and influential, such as yourself, can make a change in this world, and we need more people like you to do so. So if anyone has any questions, any comments, now is your chance to say something. Don't be shy. This is a safe and welcoming space.
I'll ask a question. Tiara, Tiara Joe Reddish, if you could share one thing that is most important you want the young people that are on the call that just listen to you to move forward with, what would you say?
Great question. I would say stay authentic to your values and goals. I think one of the hardest things about kind of being thrust in the spotlight and having tons of eyes and ideas on me is that there are a lot of people who will say, well, maybe that's not right, or maybe that's not how I would do it. But as someone who at the core of my beliefs ran on an unapologetic platform that I was going to center Black people, I was going to center queer people, and I was going to center low income voices and people most impacted by injustice, I have to keep true to that in every single aspect of things that I vote on. So whether it is a comprehensive sex ed bill, whether it is advocating for menstrual products, or whether it's advocating for reforms to the current prison system that we currently have, I need to make sure that those values align with why I started in office, and I keep true to those and remind myself and have my friends and have the people who elected me remind me of the core values that got me in this position in the first place. And sometimes it's hard, but I think it's much better to stay true to who you were when you first came into office. And though some of your ideas may change and morph, at the center of it, I predicated my entire race on justice and liberation for all people, particularly the most marginalized. And I hope to continue to center those values throughout the rest of my time in office.
I just have two things. I was gonna say, I think you're really awesome. There's the AOC documentary, and she has this quote, and it's like, I'd rather have a Republican in office who is a real person than like a politician Democrat. And I think you're like a perfect, like just a really great advocate for that. And I think it's just really inspiring. But the question I wanted to ask is, what could we do in like small Chariho to like help raise Black voices and also just like spread awareness in general?
Yeah, so the best way to elevate Black voices is to listen to Black voices, honor and elevate them by listening to where are the leaders? What are they actually calling for? And I think it's oftentimes one of the scariest things for people to ask, because oftentimes they're not the answers that we want to see. Lots of folks, when they answered the calls for defunding the police or for Black Lives Matter, they did everything but defunding the police and honoring that Black Lives Matter and putting less cops in schools and making sure there were more counselors. And they're hard conversations, but they're necessary conversations. And so I think it's important to get uncomfortable with the difficult conversations that we often avoid because no one wants to have them, but honor and elevate the lived experiences of people who are experts on what it's like to be Black and to be Black in a community in which you live in.
So if anyone else has questions or comments, now is your chance. Just feel free to unmute yourself and speak.
Of a comment / question. One of the most inspirational photos for us in my office, particularly, was a picture of you and 2 of your colleagues on the was it the State House steps, and
Yeah.
loved that photo. I thought what happened after that was really interesting because you challenged a newscaster who made a comment about it. And could you just share that with everyone? Because I think you handled that with such grace and you know, it was just an inspiration to a lot of us who follow you.
Yeah, so the photo that you're referencing is a photo that myself, Senator Cynthia Mendes, and Representative Brianna Henry took as a celebration for the 3 of us winning our historic seats. Representative Brianna Henry is the first elected Native woman in the Rhode Island General Assembly, and she is a member of the Nipmuc tribe in Rhode Island. And Cynthia Mendes is also Cape Verdean. Her father is an immigrant from Cape Verde, and her mother is a Puerto Rican woman. And so with our historic races in Rhode Island, we decided to take an empowering photo shoot. And that photo shoot was the source of a lot of backlash. We received some comments that it was militant and we're wearing dresses. We're in like quote unquote political workplace attire, and it was called fierce in a negative connotation and not in like a positive, like, yes, fierce Beyonce, we love you. But it was also said that we looked militant, and a lot of the comments that we've gotten have been a lot of like labeling us as folks who are radical or progressive or any of those other negative connotations that people have when they think of empowered people. And we really had to stop the conversation and say, you never asked us about our platforms. You never had a conversation about us, but you had a conversation about us, but not with us. And we got on to, we were able to speak with Jean Delacinti and explain that there is nothing radical about believing that a living wage should be able to support any family in our state. There's nothing radical about saying that every single school should provide a quality education, no matter what zip code a person lives in. And there's nothing radical about believing that we should be handling our climate crisis and moving away from fossil fuels in our country. There's nothing radical about believing that every single person in our community deserves to have food, shelter, and a safe place and community to live in. And so once we were able to challenge those ideas and take away the stigma of new young outsiders who are coming to disrupt the system and say, we're not trying to disrupt, we're not trying to turn everything on its head. We're trying to make everyone in that chamber question what it means to lead and serve for all of Rhode Islanders. And yes, we're going to work with people. And yes, we're going to work with our new colleagues in both the House and the Senate. But we're also not going to take the status quo at face value because it hasn't served people like us. I share my story of being low income. Brianna Henry's, Representative Henry's, also shares her experience of being formerly low income and homeless. And Cynthia Mendes shares her experience of growing up low income as well. And those are the center and focus of what are the narratives that we want to bring to the State House. And that is not an exclusionary framework, it's an inclusionary framework that includes every single person in that State House, but most importantly, centering and elevating the voices of the historically marginalized in the form of 3 newly elected officials.
Awesome. So just so everyone knows, Brianna Henry's was invited to be here tonight, but she unfortunately couldn't make it in real time, but I will be sharing a video she sent to me in a little bit. So any last questions for Tiara Mac? Anyone? My dad.
Okay, great. Hi, Tiara. I'm David Rubenstein. I'm Sabrina's dad, which is really inconsequential to the conversation. But my first time learning about you, my first time hearing you, and as a human being, you're so impressive, whether you're Black or queer. Those things are kind of irrelevant to me because all I see is a really bright young person that's creating a conversation, which is fantastic. But I do have a question for you. So I come from Philadelphia, so I sometimes have connection to my Philadelphia roots. My family came from Puerto Rico, so I
Go
have
Eagles.
those. And so you mentioned you were from Georgia, which was one of the hot points of this past election. And you said that there were differences from where you came from, but also a lot of similarities from where you came from, that you noticed, and you tried to work within that observation. So how do you, as a human being, reconcile some of the things that you are so connected to in Georgia? You cannot take away the fact that that's your history and that's your background, that's your family, your friends, your culture. And I'm sure there's days that you're very proud of that, and there's days that you're not so proud. So as a human being, how do you reconcile some of those feelings?
Yeah, well, I think that's the importance of storytelling. I don't think there's anything wrong with having grown up in the South, and I think that growing up in the South was really integral to the person I am and the person that I am becoming. And I will always be that person who was raised in just north of Georgia, Norcross and Duluth. And I think it's also important to always lead with our stories. And that's why on every single door I knocked and a lot of the conversations I start, it's not to engage in identity politics and say that my identities are important and like you must first see my identities, but it's to tell a story. Every single identity that I have tells a story. Formerly low income, that tells a story of someone who saw their mom work paycheck to paycheck to raise 5 kids. Being a Black woman, it tells a story of someone who is systemically and historically oppressed in the United States. Telling the story of a woman, a young woman, someone who's experienced not only misogyny, but also systemic pay inequity based on my own gender. Being a queer person, someone who didn't even see representation of people who look like me on social media, in national media, who didn't even see that it was a possibility to marry someone that I loved until 2013 in most states. And so these are some of the reasons why I always lead with storytelling. And sometimes my story is different. Sometimes I don't lead with, I'm a young Black queer, formerly low income Black woman. Sometimes I lead with, I'm a former math teacher, I'm a former sex educator, I'm a donut lover, I'm a rugby player. And all of those things tell a story that connects us to different people and different paths. And I think it's really important to center ourselves in our stories, because that's the only thing I claim to be an expert in. I'm not an expert in policy. I'm not an expert in math. I'm not an expert on what it will look like to change fundamentally our systems and what we have, but I am an expert on Tiara Mac and how I grew up. And I will continue to center that and use that to, one, connect to other people, and to also lead from a place of authenticity. I can only say where I've come from and where I hope to be going based on where I've been.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. So I'm going to move on to our next speaker since we
Oh,
only
I think
have
there's
an
another
hour.
question.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Tiara. My name is Frank Hopkins, and I'm so happy to see a great turnout today. And as I listened to your story, I happened to be driving up to Warwick today and listening to a TED Talk. And there was a young woman on there by the name of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And she talked about, she's a Nigerian writer, and she talked about single story bias. And as I listened to your discussion about the different elements that we all have that often are overlooked because of the biases that are inherent in all of us, but in particular, this young lady spoke about the single story bias she experienced when she came to America as a Nigerian immigrant, that people didn't even realize that the language, the primary language in Nigeria was English. And they couldn't understand how she was able to speak so English so well. And I think the message that I hear from you, along with you overcoming the biases of being gay, being a Black woman, being an activist, I think that's a great takeaway for these young students as they begin to migrate into different environments. you know, we come from cultures that oftentimes are very sheltered. And when you get out in the world, as you traveled from Georgia to Rhode Island, the differences in what people experience, I think is a great takeaway for these students to understand. Don't judge a person by what you might have heard about a certain group of people, because everybody's different. And you may really learn to understand what those people are all about and really like what they have to offer and try to put those biases in the background.
Well,
Yeah, sorry, did I miss a question in there?
I guess not really, just some observations.
Gotcha.
Awesome. So I hate to cut Tiara's time short, but we also have other speakers to get to. So now I'm going to share with you a trailer to a documentary called Born Black and Female. I'm actually really excited to share this. So I made a documentary in the summer, which Ms. Hall mentioned, but this takes it to a whole other level that is more personalized than the one I did. So I'm super excited to share this with you, and then I'll get into our next.
Sabrina, I think you have to leave yourself unmuted, only because we all can't hear it.
All right, let's try this again.
I just wish that like someone would have told me, in society, as you grow up, you will find that people will treat you as if you are less than. Like, I wish someone would have told me that these things will happen, but you have to like rise above them.
I think that, you know, the racism that Black women face can be anything from like the color of our skin to like the stereotypes of our attitude.
I get up, I get dressed, and I go outside and I live my truth. Every day that I'm alive and I function in society and I deal with people, that's my resistance, because I like to change people's minds and thought process of what they assume.
Be yourself. Don't worry about what other people think of you. Nobody can be you but you.
If you don't have anybody to cheer you on, cheer yourself on. Do your research. Look into your history. Look into the history of Black folks in this nation. Look into your history and you'll see yourself there.
She could hear him telling Mama that the girl has too much spirit, that she had to learn to mind, that that spirit had to be broken.
Okay, so as you guys can see, that looks like an awesome documentary. So Liz actually shared that with me the other day, and I did some intense stalking to to find some contact information for our next speaker, which is Juanita Wilbur. So if you want to introduce yourself, tell us, you know, a little bit about yourself and the documentary.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. As you guys saw, my name is Juanita Wilbur. I now go by Draya. It's just a name I prefer. But I am 24 years old. I have been creating art since, well, you know, since the beginning of time, but I now work as a program director at a nonprofit organization that's youth-led and theater-based called Reddish Black Inc. in New London, Connecticut, where I was also born and raised. And there we use our activism, or we express our activism through different art mediums. So it could be from acting, singing, dancing, visual art, script writing, like literally anything that you can think of, we've done it. And actually this summer is going to be our first time trying to shoot for a movie. So that's another thing we're trying to accomplish. But for me individually as an artist, I joined writer's block as a student when I was 12 years old, and I started writing. Didn't know I had it in me, but it became something that I really, really loved. So I actually went to school for my bachelor's in English. But I do want to shout out there, I did go my freshman year to Johnson and Wales University, fell in love with Rhode Island. That is my second home. So I really appreciate being on this call now. But yes, I have made this documentary for my junior seminar course, which was memoirs. And we read the book Bone Black by Bell Hooks, which is just a recounting of her life growing up in Virginia as a dark-skinned Black girl. And what really struck me about this book was that her experiences, her thoughts, her words, everything that she put together sounded exactly like me growing up. And I wanted to see if any other Black woman I knew, but I wanted to show and to display that Black women do sometimes have the same experiences. So with the help of a therapist, with the help of my friend who graduated from film school, I put together a whole survey asking questions and asking for recountings of experiences and thoughts and stuff like that. So I just grabbed the smallest group of women that I could from like a Facebook post that I made asking if anybody wanted to be in a documentary, made a whole group chat, had them come in on different dates, asked them the same questions, but came up with so many different and similar experiences. So it was very eye-opening. And I specifically wanted to open it up because I want to acknowledge that I am a light-skinned Black woman. And although I am a Black woman, I do have privileges that darker skinned Black women do not have. They don't have. So I didn't want to put myself up there when, not that, misery is a contest, but compared to darker skinned women who do experience prejudice more and who do struggle a lot more than lighter skinned Black women because we're preferred or because we're seen as a certain different way. I wanted to give them the platform to talk about those experiences. And yeah, that's what really inspired me to make the documentary. I want to create more, and I want to create different genres, especially shout out to Jordan Peele, who has started his own genre of historical horror. I think it's genius, and to incorporate Black stories in there, I definitely want to do the same. So after seeing his movies, it's definitely inspiring me, not only to write short stories and creative prose and stuff like that, but to make another film. But yeah, that's my whole life.
All right, I see everyone giving a round of applause, which is great. And just so everyone knows, we're going to send the link to the actual documentary to everyone once this meeting is concluded, so you guys can watch it if you so choose. Now's the chance to ask any questions, make any comments, just like we did before. And you can feel free to just unmute yourself and speak.
Draya, that was excellent. If you ever need a woman of lighter skin color to share the experiences of being in a family that met all the shades, my mother, who's 83, was born and raised in South Carolina. So my mother and father got to see all the different challenges and things like that. And she would love to share some stories with you just within our own family of the differences.
Absolutely.
So Draya, thank you so much for sharing that video. I actually am an owner of a paper, and one of my columnists this week actually did a in-depth article on colorism and the impact that it has within the families and how it is a taboo for African American people, and how while people may not realize that we actually struggle within our own family circles a lot of times. So thank you for sharing that. It was very different, and it made me actually feel really good. I'm always really, really happy to see that younger people, and I have a daughter who's in her 30s, younger people who are probably below 30 are taking on these topics and having these conversations that unfortunately a lot of us did not do. And not because we did not I guess, want to, but we really didn't know how to, or even knowing how to, we didn't know how it would be taken. So thank you, and I have to say that we should continue and tackle more and go bigger and share your stuff with more people, because while you may live in a segment, he just talked about South Carolina. One thing that you'll find about African American Black people is that we all struggle pretty much with the same thing, no matter where we are. And we have to learn how to go beyond boundaries of states and counties and cities and just understand that we all can do better if we actually share that information. So I thank you for doing it. I'm glad I'm going to have it, because I'm definitely going to share it in Philadelphia.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. And two things I want to speak on. Colorism is a problem. I heavily advocate for my niece, who was born when I was 10 years old. My sister was a young mother, so this was life-changing for me. She came out as beautifully chocolate as ever. And like from that moment on, like I knew that she was going to be targeted for not only hatred, but just self-hatred. Especially growing up in predominantly white towns, I made it my cause to make her feel as beautiful as anybody else, feels. Like more to talk on it for people that don't really understand. Only in I don't want to say only, but in Black families, we have to provide our own support, our own love, our own everything, because we are not seen in magazines regularly. We are not seen in movies regularly. Every time that we are depicted in media, we are seen as either a villain or either as a stereotype. So, over time, this just becomes a trained thing of expecting what you're going to be like. And I just want to really break that chain, because it really comes down to colorism. I know my experiences will not never compare, but they will never be as bad as someone who is darker than me, because of the prejudice and because of the self-hatred that's been instilled of just years of institutionalized racism and propaganda that we've all had to face. And yes, I do want to continue with this as well. I don't really know where else I could go with it, because there's just so many Black experiences, and Black people are just so versatile. But I do want to keep this going. But thank you.
Awesome. So like I said, this is a chance to make some comments, ask any questions. Feel free to just unmute yourself. Yeah, go ahead, Leah.
Your documentary looks amazing. Delia and I will definitely be watching it. Kind of talking about the documentary, what do you think was the most like impactful like thing or story that you like uncovered throughout that whole process?
Most impactful story. It's funny because it's been a while since I watched it. And actually, Sabrina, I do want to say this now. You hitting me up about it, like I was just like, wow, people actually go and look for this. Like it was a project that I just put out there, and like I just wanted to share it with people that I knew. But the fact that this is really getting out there, like that really warms my heart. So I appreciate you for that. But the most impactful thing, I mean, the women that was in there were just amazing, intelligent women. I think the most impactful thing about it, so I split the story into two different parts, which is resistance and resilience. How Black women have had to resist in America and how they bounce back. And just hearing the stories of having their Black joy like silenced. I mean, just on the topic of hair, like hair is our way of communication, our way of community, and just talking about how the Black women I interviewed damaged their hair for years so that they could blend in and not be seen as just a target of ridicule or harassment or anything. That was bothersome to me because I thought, that was a struggle I went through, me having low self-esteem issues or whatever. But to see that it was a Black woman's struggle, like just losing inches of hair, just and dying, all because we're really trying to fit an image because our hair is either seen as unprofessional, inappropriate, dirty, unkempt, all those kinds of things. So I think relating to the woman with stuff like that was definitely impactful.
So I actually have a question for you. So you did this born Black and female, but do you think you'd ever do a born Black and male project to get a whole different perspective on it?
So with that, it's really tough because we exist in a patriarchal society. So not that I do not want to give voice to Black men, but I want to give voice to those who don't even get a chance, like Black women, Black trans folk, like people who aren't even considered. And even though Black men are discriminated against, they're still men. So I feel like, again, not measuring misery, but they don't face the misogyny, the misogynoir, certain things that Black women and Black trans folks do not face. Thank you. That was a really good question.
So this is the last chance for questions for Draya and her awesome documentary. If anyone has anything to say, this is your chance. Go right ahead.
Hi, I'm Nicole. This next question is actually for the both of you. I'm part of the diversity book club at our school, and a question that we talk about, or we just started to talk about with the members, is that now that we've been engaging in these courageous conversations, really getting into these stories, leading, change with stories, what do we do with it? Because knowledge is power. Like, how do we really grow and have these courageous conversations and open it up to a community instead of just a small group of like-minded people? How can we open that up and really get conversations going, telling stories and making a change?
That's a really important question. And I would say the most important thing to think of when opening up is just giving the opportunity for that platform to marginalized folks. So having them create what type of conversation they want to have, who exactly they want to speak with, what exactly they want to talk about. Because especially depending on who it's coming from, it can be seen as not a way to profit, but a way of just like glorifying Black trauma. And that's something that Hollywood is doing a lot. You see a lot of slave movies that are being done, a lot of Black historical figures being like having their biopics done, but still we know how they end. It is just they disguise it as diversity, but really it's just Black trauma, Black experiences that have been lied about. And here's a film going to tell us the truth when it's not really down to it. So having Black folk or people of color or queer people lead the conversation, I think that's the most important.
Awesome. So I hate to cut you short, but we are going to move on to our next speaker, Mr. Joe Reddish. After everyone is done speaking, if there's any questions or comments left over, everyone can feel free to stick on and ask those questions. But for now, we're just going to kind of get on with the program and invite Mr. Joe Reddish to speak.
Well, Thank you, Sabrina, and thank you to the Interact group, and thank you, Draya and Tiara, because I feel it's an honor to kind of follow after the two of you at this point. I'll tell you a little bit about me. I'm born and raised Californian. My roots are actually in South Carolina, but I was born in 1960, and I know most of you are going to say, wow. So I'll start with a little humor for us this evening. It is not a myth. You know, we do look a lot younger. And Frank, I hate to tell you this, I'm 60 years old and Black, but I'm 42 and Caucasian. So there is a scale there. I was part of Stockton, California, where I was born, and my parents moved out there in '58. My dad went out there in the military, then got into education along with my mom in the '60s. My father actually wrote the desegregation plan for Stockton, California. I was part of the first integrated elementary school, which happened to be Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School. They skipped the high schools for integration, so I was one of 3 Black kids in my junior high, and then went on to high school where our school was integrated. Times were different back then. Most of you were not born or knew what segregation was or and things back then, but times were different. And as we've moved forward, things have changed. I'll share, my mom faxed me an excerpt from one of my dad's speeches he gave about 15, 20 years ago, because he was very involved in the community. Unfortunately, he just passed away in December, but his words live on. And he said, history will record that the 1990s ushered in a chain of events that seemed bent on abandoning quality education for the masses. These will no doubt occupy prominent and significant space and coverage. But this same history, I hope, will write a concluding line which states that citizens of the late 20th century, we're now in the beginning of the 21st century, decided that only an educated people could survive, and every person will have equal opportunity to succeed in these areas. And so as we look forward to where we are today, he added, these citizens remembered sufficiently early that mistakes and blunders at the beginning of the century, we're now in the 21st century, are ultimately overshadowed by what happens to rectify these blunders in the end. So as we listen to Tiara tonight and Draya, they shared, I think, some of the things that are most important that we got to keep an eye on the ball. I'm going to share something I found from Idris Goodwin, and it talks about, it's a commentary. Diversity asks, who's in the room? Equity responds, who is trying to get in the room but can't? Whose presence in the room is under constant threat of erasure? Inclusion asks, have everyone's ideas been heard? Justice responds, whose ideas won't be taken as seriously because they aren't in the majority? Diversity asks, how many more of us, Black people group, do we have this year than last year? Equity responds, what conditions have we created that maintain certain groups as the perpetual majority here? Inclusion asks, is this environment safe for everyone to feel like they belong? Justice challenges, whose safety is being sacrificed and minimized to allow others to be comfortable maintaining dehumanizing views, as stated by Defina Lazarus Stewart. I share that with you, and I'll share a little bit more of my background. And from my background of my family is, I was blessed with community service. So some of the things I do in life, I'm part of People to People International. And as Tiara and Draya said, seeing the world from a different view and seeing all the different people and understanding. And so I knew, when she said, what she was going to say when she said about the Nigerian person, they speak English. A lot of people don't know that. Why? Because I've traveled and I have interactions with different people. The opportunity for all of us is to know more people. I also am chair of AIDS Care Ocean State. So I am family, but most people don't know it. If you're on the phone with me, you don't know I'm Black because I don't usually sound Black. Even a Black person says, oh, you're Black. But to that point it's not about what I look like or what I sound like. It should be about the experience that we gain from each other. I also sit on two other state boards that are really important to me, and one local one. The most important local one is the Community 2000 organization, which provides scholarships to each of the young people on here if you apply for them. $2,000 a year for 4 years if you apply and get selected. But more important, I sit on one called the Commission for Prejudice and Bias. This was formulated a little bit before I moved to Rhode Island 28 years ago. It was originally formulated to protect and start preventing what they called racist stops or profile stops. And what the organization does is we work with the Attorney General's office in providing training to our law enforcement officers, our new ones, especially, who are coming on to be part of our community, to be part and integrated with us, and helping them understand what prejudice and bias is throughout the nation, but really within the United States, or I mean within Rhode Island, but also how to apply the laws to protect everybody in Rhode Island, how to protect families against neighborly bias or whatever it may be. The importance of that is that, you know, we talked about it, heard a little bit about defund the police. Well, we as a state are already way ahead in a lot of instances, which a lot of people don't realize because unfortunately that organization is one of the best kept secrets. But it's a multitude of different faces that exist on that commission of 17 people. But the most important thing is it's a matter of getting people to be engaged. Martin Luther King said, an individual has not started living until he can rise above the narrow confines of his individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity. And I think what the Interact group, what you are doing by bringing these conversations forward is extremely important. I think the question was asked to Draya, what can be done more? Well, each of you is a pebble in the pond of a conversation. And what's important is that you want to share your experiences, because we live through experiences in life. And if we share those experiences, and those fears go away. I still remember when I moved to Richmond, Rhode Island, or I like to refer Wyoming because it sounds a little fancier coming from California. When I bought my house, I was one of 3 Black families in Richmond at that time. But everybody knew what I did, supposedly, where I worked. Some people were concerned because here I was, this Black gentleman from California, you know, moved into the bigger house, the big house in the neighborhood. Oh, wait a minute, he just bought a second car, but he's not married. He bought a sports car. Maybe he's a drug dealer. So all those assumptions started to come forth. So I had fun with it. And as I do with sometimes when I deal with individuals who don't want to ask you what you do or get to know you. So in the morning when I left for work, I'd put the top down on my Miata and I'd put my hoodie up, put my sunglasses on, and I'd pull up to the Edwards grocery store and I'd be playing classical music. Imagine the shock in their face. They're like, wait a minute, he's playing classical music. Something's wrong. But once people got to know me and understand me and realize that I chose to live where I live, where my parents live in California, ironically, where they moved. We moved out of the south side of Stockton, which was the heavier Black area where the Blacks were supposed to live, but they chose to go live where they wanted. I grew up in a neighborhood, well, guess what? It was one of 3 Black families, you know, but we drove cars like everybody else, had a nice house. And what I found is experience, or teaching people to have experiences, in the long run, at a certain point, will override some of their prejudice. My very best friend, his grandmother was hated Blacks until she met me. And she realized that, wow, I guess they aren't that bad. Does he have his own views? Yes. I still remember the election last year. When I was home before the election, he messaged me, oh, you ready for the election? I said, yeah. He says, you're voting for Trump, right? But not thinking, he wasn't thinking about color. He was just thinking about who he wanted to support and thought I was probably supporting him, not realizing what some of the values of that individual went against some of the values I live by and may be affecting a close friend of us. We had a good conversation. He still had his Trump sign up, which was okay. Everybody has decisions in life that they make. the point of sharing those things is that we as a community, we as a society have to educate. We must continue to move forward. One of the things my dad wrote way back when is we can read in history tomorrow only what we have the foresight to write today. We're still holding the pen for the 21st century now. And that's important because individuals like Tiara and Draya and others and each of you that are part of this conversation tonight will help write the history. Dr. Benjamin Mays, late president emeritus of Morehouse College, stated on achieving success, it must be borne in mind that the tragedy of life doesn't lie in not reaching your goal. The tragedy lies in having no goal to reach. It isn't a calamity to die with dreams unfilled, but it is a calamity not to dream. It is not unfulfilled, it is not a disaster to be unable to capture ideals, but it is a disaster to have no ideals to capture. It is not a disgrace not to reach for the stars, but it is a disgrace to have no stars to reach for. Not failure, but low aim is sin. By being part of this conversation, we are all going to be challenged to aim high to make a change in the way things have been. That change has already started in life. If we write well, it will read well. If we write poorly, it will read poorly. It is our decision together to make those differences. What you do in life speaks louder than what you say. So there's a task for each of us to continue to have voices heard, as the Interact group has done. The one that manages that experience, and my dad would say this all the time, even up to weeks before his death when he gave a speech, is the person that manages and controls our destiny. Guess what? We see their smile the first thing every morning when we get up and brush our teeth, because they're looking back at us. It's ourselves to make that change. We are a diamond in life, and most of you understand what a diamond is. It has many facets. And the most important thing is that a diamond's value drops when all the facets don't shine. So I encourage each person on this Zoom this evening is to think about life as a diamond and go figure out what are the facets of the community that can make a difference, that need to be shined or shown that they can shine in a sharing manner to make sure that all individuals are accepted. Yes, people of color have greater challenge, but we also need everybody of color. And I say of color because when I speak at the police academy, they ask me, I go through a little series of, when I was back in 1960, I was known as colored, Negro, and that word that rhymed with wigger. And I would tease them. I say, well, I'm sorry, with the Rhode Island accent, it would be wigga. In 1970, 80s, I became Black. And somehow in the late 90s, I became African American. At that point in time in life, I changed my definition to I'm hue enriched, because I realized in high school, I ran track, but I could never throw the spear thing. My great-great-great-grandmother was white, which probably explained why I didn't dance too well. No offense to anybody, but I don't dance that well. So I took on the definition of hue enriched. And really that goes back to my concept of diamond. We are all part of the same hue. As within the Black culture, there are different shades, but in cultures around the world, we are all different shades, but we're all part of the hue, what's called the spectrum of life. Thank you.
Awesome. That was amazing. I loved everything you said, and I really appreciate you coming on here to speak tonight. So we have reached our 1 hour mark, and I'm going to invite everyone to stay maybe 10 minutes longer to make some comments, ask more questions to Mr. Reddish. And then after that, we do have one more speaker who, as I said, is virtually, but it's just a video, so she won't be able to answer any questions, and I'm going to close the meeting with that video. So now's your chance to unmute and ask any questions or make any comments to Mr. Reddish.
Mr. Reddish, hi.
Hello.
Andy Lau. That was great. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I come from, my high school was New Rochelle, New York. And we were the first, I dropped this in the chat, my classmate, actually you're younger than me, is an independent film director. And she made a film called Leveling Lincoln about the first school district in the North to be desegregated. I lived through the latter part of that when I was at New Rochelle. So like your dad, yeah, just wanted to share that too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was wondering, like, especially in like a place like Chariho where it's not like diverse particularly, is it like hard to start conversations with people about like intersectionality when they disagree with you so much a lot of the time because of their like internalized prejudice?
I'll start that conversation. I've substitute taught at Chariho School way back when, just like about, I'll just say 18 years ago, when most of you weren't born. But it was interesting being a substitute teacher there. The acceptance was pretty good, but there weren't a lot of individuals. I was the abnormality as a substitute teacher, but I've never allowed abnormality to soften my voice or soften my expectations in that process. As you know, Charo has started the anti-racism task force. And one of the first things we did is we changed the name from anti-racist task force to anti-racism task force. And it's a forward-thinking conversation that needed to take place because things are changing. The demographics of Chariho are changing, but more so, Chariho students have to go out into the rest of the world. And to have them, what you guys do here with the Interact group is important because it's going to teach them how to be more accepting and learning about and be wanting to learn about different cultures, but also LGBTQ challenges. You know, you've had an individual who was trans, who went through a lot of challenges, but she was the one that carried the torch first in this process, which was important, but then the community came together. But education is, I think, really key to making those experiences better and helping people, because usually lack of education is what drives fears. It's the fear of the unknown. So that's where the opportunity is.
So if anyone else would like to say something, now is your chance, or else I'm just going to move on to our next speaker, which is Brianna Henry's.
I was gonna say, I guess I'll say something. I just wanted to say, Sabrina, thank you for putting this all together. I think this was amazing and very informative. And I think you all had amazing things to say, but I do want to have a question for Mr. Reddish. I know you've seen and probably had many experiences, and based off of our climate today, I was wondering if you think, based on a lot what you've seen with young people and all these people taking stands and trying to move everything in the right direction, do you feel that we are going to get to a point where we're gonna maybe not have as many of these issues anymore? Or do you feel like we are steering towards a direction? Because I know you said that you have been through all the different points and dealt with segregation and all of that.
I think we're going to get there. We have a ways to go. But the important piece, I'll just use the town of Smithfield recently had some racist graffiti and homophobic graffiti and anti-Semitism graffiti in their town. the people of the town responded, as well as the town, the Smithfield town council and town manager. I was part of a general discussion. They had a town hall meeting, and I was incredibly amazed at the thoughtfulness and the sharing that took place. And those are the types of conversations that we're going to have to see more of throughout all areas. And I think it being more proactive. And going back to the question of Draya, how do we educate? Well, documentaries help, but we can create all the documentaries in the world, but we got to get our friends and neighbors in front of those so that they're not afraid to know that it's okay to have neighbors that are different. It's okay to have, because your neighbors look back at you and say, you're different. Well, we're all different, but we need our differences is what makes us stronger and more an interesting people in an interesting society. So, and then getting people that when there is a challenge, we need to report it. That's the bottom line. The Attorney General's office is right there. And he said, if you have a problem, don't be afraid to raise your hand and say, I had a problem. And I'll just share what our website at the commission is calloutprejudicerhodeisland.org. And it's a place you can go, you can see what's going on, but you can also, if you see something that's not right and you're not comfortable reporting locally, report it through there. You'll get a response. We capture it. It goes directly to a special attorney general person who works with you to investigate. So thank you for the question.
Awesome. So I think the biggest thread we're seeing tonight is the see something, say something trend. And those of us who consider ourselves to be allies to the Black and African-American or person of color community, we just need to make sure that we help people's voices be heard and we are allies to them. So our last speaker is Brianna Henry's. She, as I said, sent in a video. So I'm going to share that with all of you right now.
Hi guys, this is Brianna Henry, State Representative of District 64 out of East Province. I'm so sorry I didn't get a chance to actually hang out with you guys and get a conversation face-to-face, one-on-one. It would have been so awesome to just have a conversation and have you guys ask me a bunch of questions. Unfortunately, due to my very busy schedule, I wasn't able to make things happen, but I'm sure in the future we'll manage to do so. I wanted to jump on here and explain to you guys a little bit about where I came from, what I'm doing, and to emphasize the importance of Black History Month. Right now, it is most important, more than ever, that we talk about Black history because it is, in fact, included in American history. For so long, it's been whitewashed and kind of erased from history books, as I'm sure you guys are learning in your history classes now. Not all of the truths have been told. What's important about my story is that I actually come from Rhode Island. I was born and raised here. I grew up in Providence. I moved to Warwick, and now I live in East Providence. The reason why this work is important to me is that it's important that someone gives a voice to those who look like me, who sound like me, and who've had the same experiences as me. I come from a low-income background. I've faced housing insecurity. Homelessness was something that I've experienced in my lifetime. I've also had to wonder where my next meal is coming from, and I've also still tried to figure out how to live paycheck to paycheck. This is something that I don't want for the future. This is something that I'd like to see change. So I actually got a little crazy, had a little bit of a happy accident, and ran for office. The reason why I really ran was because I figured if someone wasn't going to do it, why wouldn't it be me? If they weren't representing the people that looked like me, who talked like me, why wouldn't I step up to that plate? I encourage you guys to get civically engaged, to be a part of these conversations, even though you're young and in high school. Challenge yourself to be a part of the conversation in any way possible, whether it's running for office yourselves down the line, staying in activism groups such as Sunrise or the Interact Club that you guys are in now. So stay engaged because we'll need voices like yours down the line. We'll need to hear from young people. We'll need to hear from those who know better. Not everyone who's in office actually is doing the right thing. And so much of what I'm doing now is trying to change that. I thank you guys so much for wanting to talk to me. Wishing I could share so much more with you, but this is just a little brief snippet of what it means for me to be in office. I will say really quickly before I close in full that I'm really working on some exciting things around housing and Green New Deal efforts and things that can really change Rhode Island for the better. So if you guys have any questions, I really hope that you reach out. I can be reached at bhenriesri@gmail.com or at bhenriesri on any social media platform. Again, I'm so sorry I couldn't make it and talk to you guys, but I really hope to talk to you all in the future. Don't hesitate to reach out and stay engaged. Have a great day, guys.
So as you guys can see, she's a very influential person in our Rhode Island government, and she's amazing. If you want to reach out to her, I have her contact information and I'll put it in the email I'm going to send to all of you after. So I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who attended tonight. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure all of our guest speakers do as well. Unfortunately, Draya and Tiara had to step out and had 2 other meetings, so we can't really have them answer any more questions. But if you have questions for me, questions for Mr. Reddish, I'd be happy to answer them. If not, thank you so much for coming, and I hope you have a great rest of your night and enjoy the rest of Black History Month and just appreciate Black culture for the amazing things they have to offer.
Thank you, Sabrina. Unless anyone has questions, I just want to make more of a comment. Joe Reddish, you have volunteered and you've come to events at Chariho for years now.
Yep.
I are also in Community 2000. As far as when Sabrina was selecting the people to come tonight, I just told her a little bit about the other things that you do every time we have an event. And I'm more on the arts and humanities side of things. And I know you come to the business partner events we have at school. So also appreciate that and all you do for Chariho High School. I know Liz is on. She is the co-advisor for Interact with me. So in my other hat, I don't know if Liz is on.
Yeah, I'm here.
I just wanted you to say it because Liz is the other advisor of Interact and another community member who gives so much to Chariho as well. And we were just talking about the award you received at the State House a few weeks ago, and just like an honor to have you in our community and supporting Chariho and the Interact Club. So I just wanted you to see, if you didn't know who Liz was, that's Liz. So I don't know if Sabrina, thank you, Sabrina. This was amazing, very inspiring. Like I said, Sabrina is the president of Interact Club. And tonight this was, we hosted an event. If any students on here would like to host an event like this, like Sabrina did, and invite some of your inspiring role models to have a night and a discussion with them, let me know. And wearing my humanities specialist at Chariho hat, we can run a night like this for you.
No, just thank you everyone so much for coming. And I'm so glad we were able to open a conversation, and I hope we can do this more often. And like I said to any students at Chariho, I would love to see more of you at the Anti-Racism Task Force meetings. It is truly eye-opening and very educational. I learned so many things that I didn't even think were relevant, that really stick out in our community, that sometimes you can look past. I know Mr. Reddish was there and Ms. Lau, but I would like to see more students get involved in that. So just keep that in mind. And I'll be sending all of you an email with the different links that we had mentioned throughout tonight's meeting. And yeah, once again, thank you so much. And I hope you have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.